So these are my 8 wedges I chose, and when you add them all together, it ends up being $13 sign, so it hits right in the middle between the highest and the lowest cost of things. 4 of the wedges are biostorage, 3 of them are heating and direct fuel use, and 1 of them is electricity and heating and direct fuel use. The first one, fuel switching, I chose this because it's on the low end of cost, and I think switching from coal to natural gas would be a huge step in the right direction, and there wouldn't be not nearly as much CO2 released into the atmosphere as with coal. I think a challenge with this would be switching from modern equipment that we have today to switching to equipment that is totally compatible only with natural gas, because it can be expensive having to switch, and you also have to consider that natural gas you have to worry about lines breaking, but it ends up being cheaper than coal-powered energy. The second is solar energy, and I chose this wedge because it's a clean source of energy, but also because there's already efforts in the world being made to convert to this type of energy, so people are already familiar with it and know how it works. It's the most expensive type of change because because of the installation of these solar panels into your home, and then also the solar panels into a farm, and then you have to consider running lines to farms to cities, and it ends up being real expensive. But I think it also ends up paying for itself, because when you compare your electricity bill versus solar, and it just ends up paying for itself. The next one is forest storage, and carbon is emitted into the atmosphere with every tree that's cut down, and there are tons of trees being cut down all the time. There are so many businesses now that is what they do, so I don't see the tree business being terminated or anything like that, but you can help save on carbon being emitted by buying, like, you could save on fencing. You start buying wire fencing instead of wood fencing, or metal buildings instead of wood buildings, or just saving on paper and not using it, or just planting trees. You can do stuff like that. The next one is efficiency buildings, and reducing the amount of energy that is put into an existing home can be a simple fix, and it's on the low side of cost. This can be done by putting in insulation, or to make sure that heat don't escape, or making sure that ventilation is where it should be, or making sure there's no cracks and cold air getting in or out of your windows or doors. You can also make sure that future homes that are built are like facing near the sun, like windows, or the thermostat is in the right location in the house. But it's a challenge because some people can't afford to put in insulation in their home or ventilate their home. But future uses, you can choose when and where things like that in your home go. So it ends up being a pretty easy fix. The next one is wind electricity, and like solar, it cuts back on the use of fossil fuels and CO2 being emitted to the air. A challenge with this one is the noise, and then you have to consider wildlife that fly into the turbines, which can kill them. To install these turbines, it ends up being kind of expensive because you have to run lines to the farm and then into the city. But it ends up being cheaper than solar is. The next one is CCS electricity, and I don't think that natural gas plants or coal plants are going to be terminated anytime soon, so this is a really good thing to do, and it's a moderate cost, but it ends up taking the CO2 released from these things and transporting it underground to depleted oil and gas fields, and this ends up being safer than transporting it CO2 via trucks on the interstate or boats on the ocean. The challenge is that there is still a chance of CO2 being released into the atmosphere if a line breaks, but that is rare, and if it ends up being more environmentally stable than just having CO2 being released into the air. Also, it costs a good bit to have these things installed, so that is also, it ends up raising the cost of electricity. The next one is soil storage. A way that you could save on carbon being emitted into the atmosphere is to quit tilling farmland or to stop using fertilizers. With that being said, I don't think tilling is going to stop because you have to till to get really big, luscious crops. But I think fertilizers, it would be an easy fix because you can go organic like many farmers are doing nowadays. So you don't use anything but strictly water on the plants, and so that helps with the CO2 being released into the atmosphere whenever the soil is tilled up. The last one is CCS synfuels, and burning coal into the atmosphere is what ultimately causes global warming from the CO2 being released, and the CCS captures the CO2 and converts it to gas and oil, and it saves on the amount of emissions to the atmosphere. It saves on energy. The problem with this one is the cost, because it ends up costing more to do CCS sand fields this way than the companies end up making off of the oil and gas. So I don't think it'll happen.